I also realized that I just won't understand why, even if God told me. If God told me that losing my son Dylan would save 10 people's souls, I would say, let me keep my son. What if it was 100 or 1,000? And I just couldn't make that sacrifice. And then I realized God did that very thing. God sacrificed his son to a horrific death. He did it for people that don't even love him or appreciate it. So I could not have done that, no matter the good that would come from it. So when I realized that, it was kind of like, well, then why no? Because it's not going to be a reason good enough for me. And I just don't understand. So when I know now that I won't understand, I'll certainly be asking the question when I get to heaven, but I don't think I'm capable of understanding it.
Welcome to the Light Your Heart with Hope podcast. I'm Erin, and I'm so thankful you're here. My hope and prayer is that through listening to today's episode, God will encourage you and do immeasurably more than all you can ask or imagine. Have you ever found yourself in the fire, barely holding on to faith? Maybe you've been begging God to come to your rescue and save you from the flames. But what if the fire is refining you? What if the heat is healing you? Today, you will hear Amy's powerful story. You can hear the grief in her voice, but you can also hear her hope. The hope that God would carry her through the fire of grief. The hope that this was not the end of her story, and that someday she would see her son again in eternity. In the midst of her pain, she cried out to God. She was angry. She asked God why. And yet she always fell back into the arms of the Father. She was faithful in the fire.
Okay, this is Amy May. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my life before marriage and becoming a mom. I think as mothers, we kind of lose ourselves into motherhood and lose who we were before. So it's been a little while since I've actually thought about these details, but I was born in Milwaukee and my dad worked for Ford Motor Company. So we moved a lot. We also lived in Ohio and Michigan and Iowa and Pennsylvania. But I actually grew up on a farm in Tennessee since I was 9 years old. And I think that the farm really shaped me because I was used to doing hard things. We did a lot of physical labor on the farm. We grew tobacco because it was a cash crop to make the payment on the farm. And we were used to struggling for money, So then my dad was killed in a tractor accident on the farm when I was 14. So that was the most significant life-changing event in my life up until Dylan's diagnosis. Then I went off to college at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And my first job was at Price Waterhouse, which at the time was a Big Six accounting firm. And that's where I met my husband, Phil. And we're both CPAs. So we call ourselves the scary couple. But we both moved over to Sony Music Publishing on the same day, which is a music publisher. And I worked there for over 4 years. And so I was in the music publishing for 4 years, but Phil's been in it for 30 years. So his music has basically always paid our bills. So because of that, I've always been keenly aware of songs and the songwriters and how the songs were written and asking the question, what was the backstory to the song? So I'm going to tell you about some of the most meaningful songs to me and throughout Dylan's illness a little later as it kind of comes up. But I then left Sony to hang out my shingle in business management in the music industry. And I had a few clients and I could do it from home. And so that's when I started having babies. And my oldest baby is now 24. That's Jackson. And then Connor's 21. Dylan would be 18 years old right now and heading off to college. So that has been hard this spring because, we should have been doing a graduation and parties and preparing for college, but we're not. So I always, in my mind, look at what should have been, and I'm sure you guys do too. But our daughter is Sophie, and she's adopted from Guatemala, and she's 15 years old. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dylan's actual diagnosis. He was our third son, and everything about him was the easiest of the three boys up until about 6 months of age. It was a really good pregnancy and a good birth. I felt I was an experienced mother and I knew what to expect. So that just made things easier. And he was 8 pounds, 12 ounces. So he was a big, chunky, healthy baby. And he was a good baby and smiley. And he was just perfect, honestly. He sucked his left thumb, just like both of the other boys. And, honestly, Sophie did too. So had 4 kids who sucked their thumb. And that's significant because it goes with one of the first symptoms that we noticed. So the first thing that we noticed was at Dylan's 6-month baby photo session, he did not want to lay on his stomach and he was crying. And I thought, well, that's my fault because I didn't give him enough tummy time. We have 2 rambunctious boys and a dog, so I just didn't lay him on the floor enough. And that's what I thought. So that started me watching him more closely. At 7 months, he wasn't sitting up. So I called the doctor. And I know that's not out of the range of normal, but, it was just another thing. And the boys had sat up earlier than that. But the doctor kind of blew it off and said, just wait. You're probably being a little paranoid. But that was my mother's instinct kicking in. So sometime over the next month, we got a pediatrician referred us to the early intervention services from the state, and they ended up sending over a physical therapist, and he got an evaluation. And somewhere in the 7 to 8 months of age, Dylan started having trouble sucking his thumb. And so the PT noticed that, and that was his comfort measure. And it was a struggle to get his thumb to his mouth because he was starting to have inverted thumbs, which we didn't know what that was, but it wasn't bent out like normal. So he wasn't able to comfort himself as well. And that's when we noticed the crying getting much worse. And at this point, we heard the physical therapist use the word regression. And we had no idea how much to fear that word. Regression means that the child is losing skills he already had. And it is very, very bad. So we got referred to a neurologist for an MRI. And I have a terrible memory, but this is a very vivid one for me. The neurologist called us in the car. Phil and I were both in the car. And so we pulled over, just happened to be behind a Sonic to have the phone call uninterrupted. And the doctor said, it's not a leukodystrophy, so that's really good. And I said, a what? I said, can you spell that? And he said, it's not that, so don't go look it up. Unfortunately, we later found out that it was exactly that. But the first MRI had come out completely normal. So we thought we were out of the woods. But we still knew something was wrong. So then we got referred to the genetics department at Vanderbilt. And they did a battery of tests. And the results came in, this one came in. And we were going, oh, great, it's not that. That's great. And then it just came in slowly. And we were relieved and happy with each one as we got a negative result. What we didn't know, because we're not doctors, is, the simple things come back first and the things that are treatable. And so we were basically ruling out the things that were more treatable. And so when we finally got the results that it was Crab A, they gave us no hope. So our geneticist at Vanderbilt gave us a few pages printed off the internet and sent us home to literally watch our son die. And I know later on we had some contact with him later, and I know he felt really bad about that. And I'm pretty sure he stopped handling that way, which is good. But the information that he gave us at the time said that the average life expectancy was 13 months old. And now at this time, Dylan's 8 months old. But there was a quote, death is certain by age 2. So we just took that as the gospel and started, planning our life accordingly. So this printout described the progression of the disease in, horrifying detail. And that's what we got. We got 2 pages and we're sent home. And that was October 4th, 2004. And I remember driving out of the parking lot, the parking garage at Vanderbilt Hospital. And it was a beautiful sunny day. And I looked around and I saw people driving cars and walking in and out of restaurants. And I just thought, how is this possible? I mean, why is the world moving? I mean, you'd think that people around you could feel that your world had just crashed in, but everybody was just going on like normal. And I just distinctly remember that feeling of how can it be, that the world is continuing on. I guess I would say that we handled it as well as anybody could hope for, in the midst of your devastation. It was definitely the hardest thing we could ever even imagine going through. As I thought about this podcast, I thought about how impactful music was on me. And of course, scripture was too. But I'm going to come from a slightly different angle with song lyrics that just basically brought me to my knees. It's like poetry when you read the lyrics instead of singing them. So I'm going to tell you about a few songs that really meant a lot to me in a little bit. As far as there were good things that happened, throughout Dylan's illness, and, we could see God working. But a lot of the things that we looked at as positives were the absence of negatives. So we knew that we could have lost our health, both mental and physical. Phil and I, as we're trying to be the caregivers, we could have lost our marriage. We could have lost, his job. I was working very part-time. We could have lost our house. We could have come to financial ruin over the medical bills. And, most importantly, we could have lost our faith, just because we're in the midst of this devastation. And I would read the Bible and see all the promises there. And, God promised comfort and peace and rescue and even sleep. He promises sleep in the Bible. And I wasn't necessarily finding all those things at the time, not when I asked for them, not when I wanted it. I wanted peace. I want it now, of course. So I just became very clear that, I would rather walk through this fire with God than without God. And that was just one of the biggest things for me. I do know that God was with me through it all. I mean, that was just super important, just not necessarily all the details that we prayed about. And some of them, we got our answer positively. And, a lot of them we didn't because, we were, of course, praying for a miraculous healing. And you don't know whether you get that or not until the very end, because you can still hope. Practically speaking, part of the way that we handled it was we learned to accept help that was offered as it was offered. It was hard because Phil and I are both very independent, and we hate to accept help, but we really hate to need the help. So but we were fortunate to have really, really good support in our friends and our neighbors and our church. So I don't know what we would have done without that because we really didn't have any family around, really at all. I was estranged from my mother and way before he was born. And I guess I've never really thought about it before, but until thinking about this podcast. But if there was something that I could have said, everything stayed the same, but I had this thing, it would have been to have a really helpful, healthy relationship with my mother so that she could help me. But there was no chance of that. And, I just saw lots of young mothers get so much help from their own mother. And, I really had none of that. So that contributed to the aloneness of just, not having your mom. And Phil's parents couldn't help either. Phil's mom had a major stroke and his dad was busy being a caregiver also. So as far as just how people around us handled it, that was us and our family, and we had a lot of support. But your periphery people, they try to say things or they don't try to say things. And for the most part, I just try to always keep in mind that no one knows what to say. And I've experienced that even having been through it, when someone's child is sick with, Krabbe or they die, and it's just really hard to know what's meaningful to that person. And honestly, there isn't anything that someone can say that's going to be much help, and they certainly can't fix it. So I just try to realize that for other people, it's harder to say something, even if it's not the perfect thing, than it is to say nothing. So I appreciated the effort for the most part, but there will always be things, words and actions that can upset you when you're in a tragic situation. And, people are different. We handle it different ways. So I once had a friend compare our grief to having to put her horse down and how devastated she was. And that was the opposite of helpful. Those things happen. But we handle it different. Even Phil and I handled our grief differently. And I was very much you can tell the tears in my voice now, and it's been 13 years, so at the time I couldn't just answer the question, how's Dylan, just randomly in the grocery store, because I would do what I'm doing right now, and I would just lose it in tears and grief, and it would affect me for the rest of the day. And, I just couldn't feel like that every day just because someone thinks they're being polite, So we ended up doing a website and putting all our updates on there. And we sent out a detailed email to the people that, we knew would be asking. And it ended up being a really big list. But that's what I had to do. I had to write it and cry while I was writing it. But then I had to not do that. I just couldn't do that every day. And so I guess people got the email and just stopped a lot of the random questions. But Phil, he was able to fend those off, and he would do it for me. Like if he saw it coming, he would answer, before I had to say anything, which was really great. But my point is, when people say something to you, even within the same couple, we handled it so differently. So that's just something to be aware of, that it's just hard to predict what someone else needs. There was so much fear, so many fears. The whole process is nothing but a parent's literal worst nightmare. And honestly, I never even had nightmares that extreme because I just didn't even know something that bad could happen. I was never that fearful of a person. But once we're in it, it was just fear, fear, fear. I was afraid about how Dylan would die. Would he be in pain? Would I be there when it happened? Would we ever have a normal life again? What would happen with my other kids? Am I doing okay by them during this? Am I doing enough? And how are they going to be after, Dylan dies in the grief and being in this for so long? Then, would I ever be okay? Would I always feel this bad emotionally and physically? So we just didn't know. We had hope. Anyway, so one of the things I think that helped me get through it was to stop asking the question why. It'll drive you crazy. And it was a conscious effort, and it's hard to do. Anyway, I just had all the questions, all the normal things. Why me? Why my son? Why my family? What did I do? Am I being punished? And I read the book of Job, and I saw all the tragedy that Job went through. And I realized that God specifically allowed all that. In the end, Job was restored. He had more children and animals and wealth. But I always struggled with how Job must have felt after the, air quotes, restoration, because having another child does not replace the child that died. So I've always wondered about that for Job. Then I thought, am I more worthy than Job? Obviously not. I came to realize that tragedy could happen to everyone, and it was all through the Bible. I also realized that I just won't understand why, even if God told me. If God told me that losing my son Dylan would save 10 people's souls, I would say, let me keep my son? What if it was 100 or 1,000? And I just couldn't make that sacrifice. And then I realized God did that very thing. God sacrificed his son to a horrific death. Also, he did it for people that don't even love him or appreciate it. So I could not have done that, no matter the good that would come from it. So when I realized that, it was kind of like, well, then why no? Because you're not going to care. It's not going to be a reason good enough for me. And I just don't understand. So when I know now that I won't understand, I'll certainly be asking the question when I get to heaven, but I don't think I'm capable of understanding it until then. So there are some songs that really met me where I was at the time. And I wouldn't necessarily say they brought me actual comfort, because I think they pretty much brought me to tears nearly every time. But they did help me feel less alone. And I know that at least the songwriters had gone through significant suffering to be able to write like this. So this one is Voice of Truth by Casting Crowns. I'm not going to tell you all of it, but you want to read it like it's a poem. Oh, what I would do to have the kind of strength it takes to stand before a giant with just a sling and a stone, surrounded by the voice of 1,000 warriors, shaking in their armor, wishing they had had the strength to stand. But the giant's calling out my name, and he laughs at me, reminding me of all the times I tried before and failed. The giant keeps on telling me time and time again, boy, you'll never win. You'll never win. But the voice of truth tells me a different story. The voice of truth says, do not be afraid. And the voice of truth says, this is for my glory. Out of all the voices calling out to me, I will choose to listen and believe the voice of truth. So the way I interpret that song, is that Satan is the giant, and he's tormenting me with words, saying I can't survive this massive challenge. And he really wants me to listen and be defeated. But I have a choice. I can listen to that awful voice, or I can listen to the voice of truth. God is telling me not to be afraid. God is telling me this is for his glory. So when the song says, the voice of truth says, this is for my glory, it helped me to let go of the question, why me? If nothing else comes from this tragedy in my life, perhaps it was for God's glory that we just stayed faithful. Not perfect, not even necessarily okay, but we did not abandon our faith in God when it would have been really easy to do so, because we didn't get the answer that we wanted to our prayers. But I did feel like we finished the race, and God did not abandon us either. And on a side note, the race, and I'm using air quotes here, the race is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So we were told, now this is in 2004, that the average life expectancy was 13 months, but death was certain by age 2. And at this time, Dylan was 8 months old. So we hunkered down for what we expected to be about 6 months for him to live. And we've had the thought, we can survive anything for 6 months. There are lots of things we could do or not do for 6 months if we had to. I could not leave the house for 6 months straight. I could do that. I could not cook, not exercise, not do anything for myself, or sleep worth a darn. I can do that for 6 months. And we took a picture of Dylan every single day for at least a year. And time went on. And Dylan survived past the 13-month average life expectancy. He survived past the death is certain by age 2 prognosis. And at some point, we realized that this is not the 6-month sprint we had in our minds. It's a marathon. We're grateful that it was. We were grateful to have him with us every single day. But it's just part of getting through it. It's just a different mindset. And we had a wonderful social worker, Trisha, that really helped us during that time. She helped us realize that we can't live like this forever. And she encouraged us to just do things a little different and get a little help in the home. We had no nursing help at all. Just a hospice nurse visit to check on Dylan once a week or so. But we had no nursing help for 4 years. So we got a helper in the home, and I'm going to tell you about two wonderful ones. I just feel like they were so much to me. Yeah, I really should write them a letter. Maybe they'll hear this. But one is Heather, who was with us for about 3 years. And she was one of the most compassionate and brave young women I've ever known. She was very young, low 20s. Dylan would throw up all over her, and she would just say, "Can I borrow a shirt?" She was so brave. And our second amazing helper was Katie Davis. Yes, she's the one who wrote Kisses from Katie. And Katie was with us during the stint where she promised her parents that she would go to college, which was fall of 2008. And she used to be our son Connor's swim coach before she went to Uganda the first time. And she was with us when Dylan died on January 6th, 2009. And she helped us through Dylan's funeral and his memorial sister. And she did the slideshow. And, she was just there to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to us during that time. And then a few days later, she left and went to Uganda to live forever. Anyway, so I'm grateful to those two and how helpful they were. So Dylan lived for 4 years and 3 months and 2 days past his diagnosis. And we just weren't expecting that. But Trisha helped us articulate in our minds that we wanted to live, and we wanted to live with Dylan and not just sit around and wait for him to die, which is kind of what the doctors told us to do. So we started doing more things and going out more and being more intentional with our time, both with Dylan and with the other kids. And one thing that Trisha encouraged us to do was go ahead and plan Dylan's funeral. It sounds a little crazy, but it was such a heavy weight and a dread. It would have stuck with us for years. And, of course, we had no idea how long. But we just had these tragic thoughts and questions in the back of our minds of, what it would look like. And, just the decisions to be made are unimaginable. If you haven't done it for the child, it's just unimaginable. So we spent some horrific time thinking about what those final goodbyes would look like. And we wrote it down and we made some arrangements and then we set it aside. And I think we came back to it like 2 years later. But we went ahead and picked the funeral home and we picked a cemetery. And we decided that we wanted the cemetery to be out in the country so that traffic going by doesn't interrupt our grief. But these are all the questions that Trisha helped us through. You just don't know to ask them, and you can't think to ask them, a day after your son dies, So we had that worked out. And then when the time came that we needed to use all that information, we were incredibly grateful that it was mostly done because we were just not in a state of mind to face it right after Dylan died. And I honestly don't know how anybody does it. We ended up putting some song lyrics to Homesick by Mercy Me at Dylan's gravesite. We put a bench there to sit on, and on the bench it says, "In Christ, there are no goodbyes, and in Christ, there is no end. So I'll hold on to Jesus with all that I have to see you again, to see you again." So I guess there's a theme with these song lyrics. It comforts us to see that and know we're going to see him again. We're 100% confident that we're going to see our son again. And on the music theme, here's the very recent song that means so much to me. It's called Scars in Heaven by Casting Crowns. If I'd only known the last time would be the last time, I would have put off all the things I had to do. I would have stayed a little longer, held on a little tighter. Now what I'd give for one more day with you. Because there's a wound here in my heart where something's missing. And they tell me it's going to heal with time. But I know you're in a place where all your wounds have been erased. And knowing yours are healed is healing mine. The only scars in heaven, they won't belong to me and you. There'll be no such thing as broken. And all the old will be made new. And the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is that the only scars in heaven are on the hands that hold you now. I know the road you walked was anything but easy. You picked up your share of scars along the way. Oh, but now you're standing in the sun. You fought your fight and your race is run. The pain is all a million miles away. There's not a day goes by that I don't see you. You live on in all the better parts of me. Until I'm standing with you in the sun, I'll fight this fight and this race I'll run until I finally see what you can see. The only scars in heaven, they won't belong to me and you. There'll be no such thing as broken, and all the old will be made new. And the thought that makes me smile now, even as the tears fall down, is that the only scars in heaven are on the hands that hold you now. So I'm going to tell you about some times when I was mad at God. I was plenty mad at God. I was 1,000% sure that God could heal Dylan, and I begged for it. But based on the fact that Dylan died, God said no to my prayers for healing. So I was absolutely mad about that. I do think I came to some level of acceptance with Dylan's illness based on letting go of the question why, and just, seeing all the tragedy in the Bible and not thinking that I was exempt from all the horrible things that happened. But honestly, I became furious with God over my lack of sleep. I really just railed at him about that. I thought, how could you do this to me? I'm going through the worst possible thing, and you just let it be worse when you could so easily give me rest and peaceful sleep. My sleep got better over time, but the problems still come and go. And it's just hard. It just makes everything worse when you can't sleep, just exponentially worse. Your grief and your frustration tolerance and your temper. Anyway, after Dylan died, I got furious multiple times again. We've had so much additional heartbreak. Selfishly, I was furious about that. But there's something called the Mount Everest effect. And it's when you've gone through something so insanely hard that you think everything else should be easy. And I definitely thought that. So we've hiked to the top of Mount Everest. But then when you picture up going the second tallest mountain in the world, that's still hard, even if it's not as hard as the worst one. So that concept helped me a little bit, just with my expectations, to not just expect, life to be easy after that. But I have struggled with the belief that we deserved an easy time of it after all we've been through, and it just has not been. And there's just been plenty of times where I felt alone, and the worst of it was in the middle of the night when I spent hours and hours laying awake and not sleeping. And sleep became a primal need. I mean, I needed sleep worse than food or anything else except maybe water. You can only survive a few days without water. So there's another song I want to tell you because it's relevant to my sleep struggles. It's Rescue by Lauren Daigle. You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless, though you have been broken, your innocence stolen. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true. I will rescue you. I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true. I will rescue you. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear you whisper, you have nothing left. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true. I will rescue you. I have said similar words. I have nothing left. Those are not words that you say to other people. But God is saying to me that he heard me when I whispered it. I hear you whisper, you have nothing left. But I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true. I know I don't shine with joy, but I do desperately desire to shine with joy. I have a bracelet kit where you can stamp a short saying and only like 14 letters or something. But mine was move to joy. And that was important to me because I truly long for joy. And yet I know there are steps that I can take to move in that direction. I can make the choice to do some things that I know are good for me. And I can mute my phone and pick up the Bible, for example, listen to worship music and fill up a gratitude journal. And those are simple things that I can make a simple choice to do. And it helped me to, I guess, think that I had a tiny bit of control in the matter of just things that I can make an effort to do. It's kind of my personality. Or I can sit and stagnate and wish for things to be different. And I'm actually pretty good at that too. And for my next bracelet, I'm going to put shalom on it. And shalom means so much more than hello and goodbye. And it's not just peace either. It's a blessing. And it means wholeness, completeness, prosperity. It means flourishing and connection with God. That's what I want. I want the fullest meaning of shalom in my life. And to wrap things up, I wish shalom for everyone listening. Each family in the midst of caring for a sick child, and each family who's lost a child. It's devastating. I will pray for our leukodystrophy families to have peace and wholeness, flourishing life, be complete again, and have a connection with God. We can only get shalom through God. And that's what I'm going to pray for these families. Thank you for having me on.
I am so thankful for Amy's testimony of faith. I've been through my own share of fires, and most of the time, I didn't think I would come out alive. I was sure the flames would consume me, but it was actually the flames that began to set me free. Amy's faithfulness in the fire renewed my strength and hope. It reminded me that no matter what I face in this life, my God is with me and he's for me and will rescue me. To learn more about Amy's story, check out the link in the show notes. Next week, you will hear the incredible story of a woman who believes in the goodness of God, even when everything around her seemed far from good. Her unwavering faith will encourage you to trust that God's plans for you are always greater than your own, that they are good because God is good. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that Amy's story encourages you to share your own story. You matter, your life matters, and your story can make an impact that matters for eternity. Make a difference today for someone who is fighting for their tomorrow.